Hello, everyone. In this training session, we will cover the second part of the payroll formula configuration, which is the house rent allowance. We are referring to the same presentation which we used during the basic salary training. If we navigate through the next slide, the agenda will remain the same, focusing on setting up the formula master and the formula result. The objective is to ensure the user understands how to configure the formula and achieve the desired calculations according to the company's policies. The prerequisites are also the same. You must have completed ONF 100 and PMT 2004 trainings. You should have already checked the configuration videos for global values, table structure, table values, component definition, input values, database function, and database items. You should also have knowledge of C# to write formulas and basic knowledge of the Onfinity framework. Now we will cover the second component formula, which is house rent allowance. The calculation of house rent allowance will be calculated as 40% of the calculated basic salary. As we know in our first session, we covered the basic salary part. Now, whatever the calculated basic salary is, we will calculate 40% of the basic salary, which will be the house rent allowance component value. The next slides are similar to configuring the formula master and configuring the formula results, as we covered in the basic salary training session. Now, let's jump into the system and write the formula for house rent allowance. To write the formula, I will log into the system with the admin role. Once logged in, I'll navigate to the Human Resources Management folder, then to General Setup, and finally to the Formula Master screen. Now, we'll copy this formula structure code and go to Visual Studio to paste it. Since I'm writing the formula for house rent allowance, I'll rename the class as House Rent Allowance version 1. To calculate the house rent allowance, I need to define some variables. The first variable is the calculated basic salary. I will define a variable named calculated basic salary equals to 0. This will hold the calculated basic salary from the basic salary component calculated in the first training part. Next, I'll calculate 40% of the calculated basic salary as house rent allowance, so I'll define another variable here. House rent allowance percentage equals to 0, representing the percentage to be calculated for house rent allowance on the basis of calculated basic salary. The next variable I will define is the calculated house rent allowance value. This will be the house rent allowance calculated value that is calculated and returned to the component. So here, I'll retrieve the basic salary of the employee. Let me show you where that is in the system first. I'll go to the General Setup, then to the Component Definitions, and under the Component Definition, I will navigate to Basic Salary. In the Balance tab, we have tagged the balance named Earning Component Balance. So, I'll use this dynamic database item to retrieve the calculated basic salary in the house rent allowance formula. Now, let's open the database items screen and search for Earning Component Balance. This is the Earning Component Balance with dimensions set to assignment default run. When the payroll executes and the basic salary is calculated, the system will store that value in this Earning Component Balance assignment default run. I'll show you this value after we execute the formula. I'll copy the name of the database item and go to Visual Studio. Here, to get the calculated basic salary, I will use databaseitem.getDatabaseitem. I need to pass the balance name, which I retrieved from the database item screen, and a default value of 0. This will provide me with the calculated basic salary of the processing employee. Now I need to calculate 40% of this calculated basic salary. I'll apply the condition if the calculating basic salary is greater than 0. Within this block, I need to retrieve the percentage of the house rent allowance to be calculated. I have configured a global value for this purpose, located in the Global Value screen. Under the General Definition folder, open the Global Values screen. You'll see house rent allowance percentage is the name of the global value. So, I'll retrieve the system global name from here, copy it, go to Visual Studio, and write house rent allowance percentage equals database item dot get database item, passing the copied global value name here and a default value of 0. Now we have both the calculated basic salary and the house rent allowance percentage. Next, we will calculate the house rent allowance value. The house rent allowance value equals house rent allowance percentage multiplied by calculated basic salary divided by 100. This will calculate 40% of the calculated basic salary and assign it to the house rent allowance value. Let's round up this figure by writing house rent allowance value equals math.round house rent allowance value. At the end, we will return this house rent allowance value to the formula engine by converting it into a string. Now we have written this house rent allowance formula. The next step is to copy this and go to the formula master. I will create a new formula and paste the formula we copied from Visual Studio. Then I will give the formula the name House Rent Allowance version 1 and save the record. Now I'll compile the formula, and the compilation is successful. Now let's verify whether the house rent allowance component is assigned to Abhishek Sharma or not. For that, I'll navigate to the Workforce Management folder and then to the Employee Work Information Payroll screen. We'll select Abhishek Sharma and then go to the Employee Work Information tab. Navigate to the Payroll Component Details, and we can confirm that the house rent allowance is already tagged to this employee. The next step is to map the formula results. To do this, we will go to the General Setup folder and then open the Formula Results screen. Create a new record, select the house rent allowance component, and select the formula we just wrote. Save this record and navigate to the second tab. We are returning only one value, so the name will be the pay value. The type will be direct because the triggering component and the target components are the same. The component is house rent allowance, and the input value will be the pay value. Save this record. Now, we will navigate to the Payroll Run screen and run the payroll for Abhishek Sharma. For that, we will go to the Salary.io folder, and under that, we will go to the Payroll Run screen. We see that we already executed the payroll when we created the basic salary component formula. So, I'll roll back the payroll and process it again. For processing, choose the employee as Abhishek Sharma and click OK. The payroll is executed successfully and the status is completed. Now we will go to the Run assignment, and after that, we will go to the Run results. You can see the basic salary calculated is 45,000 rupees, and 40% of the calculated basic salary is the house rent allowance. In this way, you can specify your percentage and calculate any component based on the calculated value of any other component, and we retrieved the calculated basic salary amount from the balances. If I go to the assignment balance, you can see in this assignment default run the balance dimension for the earning component. Balance is 63,000 rupees now because my house rent allowance, which is 18,000 rupees, and the basic salary, which is 45,000 rupees, are contributing to this particular balance. So, this is how we calculate components based upon the value of other components. In the next part, we will cover tax deduction, which will be calculated on the earning part, and it will use table values to determine the percentage to be deducted based on the earning amount. That concludes the house rent allowance training session. Thank you for attending.